Okay, first, being a number of places, I guess, 6-head job, I want to work with you guys too on practice format in the off season especially. So just communicate with Michael, like if this is working, how long you're out there, because I've been around a lot of people too, and overtime, some people don't like, when it's open the entire time. So I'm good in the off season about open communication and helping you guys do your job. I think that practice has gone really well. I think they're really competitive. I think that anytime you go somewhere it has nothing to do with previous staff, you have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of work to do besides what is the obvious that everybody thinks about roster changes and portal and additions, but how you practice and how players think, to fit into the way that you want things done. So, that's a constant battle for us, and so I can see that improving out there. Understanding how to practice. We want to practice really physical, but also protect the team in how that we practice. And that maybe sounds really easy, but it's challenging to get right to that middle spot of how to do that. So it's been going well, and I think there's great competition out there.
Coach, talking to defense a little bit, can you talk about what you want the identity of your LSU defense to look like, and how did the dots connect with Blake Baker being your DC coming back, and what kind of fit was that with you and him on offense, defense?
So, obviously playing LSU every year like we did at the previous place, you got to watch the transformation defensively when Blake got here and how that worked and how much they improved each season. And so, I was very pleased that we were able to keep him. That really helps with player transition. If you start over on both sides, it's like you're creating an expansion team nowadays, because you have to basically scratch everything's from scratch, and majority of the players leave the place. And so, it was really critical to keep him because he has done a great job continuing to improve them, and now we want to go to another level and play really physical, dominant defense, and that creates a lot of havoc and turnovers, but at the same time plays with great discipline. So that's been here before, a number of times, and so that's a big goal, to get that back to that style of play that nobody wants to play LSU's defense like it used to be.
Yeah, Coach, just had a question about your running back room. Obviously, you guys brought back Harlem and Caden. I think fans are pretty familiar with those guys and what they can do on the field. The four that you brought in from the transfer portal, I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you wanted to see and what you guys wanted to attack in the portal with that position, and just kind of the guys that you brought in to help supplement that group.
Yeah, I think as you look at each position, we look at each position as like its own team, meaning, when we get here, okay, how can we make that room the best that we can from top to bottom? And I believe that's something that we've done really well in not just the headline guys, at places that we've been, but how do you build it, because that impacts special teams too, but it impacts even the bottom, how do you practice on service team on the other side? And so, kind of a constant trying to make our roster the best we can. And so with the running back room, like many offensive positions, there were not many numbers there left. And so to go in and add people of different ages, different skill set was really, really critical. So, and that'll be a very open competition like everything here. It doesn't matter if you've been here before, how many stars that you were, or where you're from. Okay, that's not how we evaluate. That's not how we do depth charts, right or wrong. It's just how we do it. Because I want to sit in here in front of the team, and they understand. Okay, if we're going to preach competition and how things are done, well, we want to see that happen. And I think over time you'll see players that aren't marquee names starting over maybe marquee names or recruits or stars and those things.
Coach, it seems you picked up a lot of wide receivers that average 15 yards per catch or more. Was that an emphasis, and how do you feel about your ability to throw the ball down the field, stretch the field?
Yeah, I think explosive plays are a very critical factor, always have been as you look at analytics, into winning games and being successful defensively, limiting them and having them on offense. And that's not just what you draw up. You got to have the players. So to add players that have made a number of explosive plays in the receiver room was important. We kind of look at that room where maybe you don't, we try to balance the room more If you think of it as like, here's your cap number for a room, instead of being really top heavy with 1 and 2 and then not having depth. I think when we've been our best, it's because we've had, 4 to 5 to 6 receivers that can all play really well. And so that's what we're striving for here. I think we have a chance to do that with the players that are out there, because then we're the best for the long run of the season and potentially into postseason. And I think you got to look at that, especially as schedules get harder with the 9th game. And basically here, the way it's set up, you really have 10 basically SEC games. So it's really critical, the numbers that you have there, and that you can stay healthy throughout the season. And when you go to your second guys, that you're still able to put pressure on defense.
Right here, Lane. You touched on special teams earlier. Anyone emerging, I know it's early, but anyone emerging yet as kick returners, punt returners?
It's too early to say that. We're just really working on basics when it comes to special teams, and we'll get into that a lot more as we get further on.
Lane, you're a week and a half in. Are you on schedule? When you watch your film after practice, are a little behind, a little ahead? You like where you're at?
I don't know that I really look at it that way, again, right or wrong. I just really look at each day, like how are we doing? It's kind of like when people want to be into goals, like how many wins and where are you at this point? I look into it more of like, okay, not goals, habits. How are we creating habits that are going to lead us into getting to numbers that everybody wants? So I don't really set those things. I think that their attitude, their energy, the way that they're approaching it has been really good. But this would be no matter what with me. I wish there was more execution going on, especially in the, offensively in the passing game. But again, you got all these new pieces. It's basically like an expansion team on offense. It's going to take some time. Now, before fans get mad, I didn't say years. It's just going to take some time.
Last week you mentioned having to have a nice conversation with the defensive line toward the end of practice. I'm just curious, over the last 3 sessions, just kind of what their response has been, what you've noticed.
Yeah, I thought it was better. I thought their mindset was better. And again, that's what you're supposed to do. You're here to coach. So you're going to walk in and everything's going to be the way you want it to be. And so I'm not complaining about that. That's just part of the process. No different than it was. We had no fights today, and we had like 6 fights the other day, and I had to teach them that don't fight. So, when you come in, you really can't expect and assume anything is the way that I approach it. You got to go back and teach everything from the beginning as if they don't know anything, no matter where you are, but especially because there's so many coming from different places. And I talk to our coaches about that a lot. They want to say, well, assume they're supposed to know how to do this. Well, don't assume that. Go back to the beginning of everything.
Yeah, I got a couple if you don't mind. Just having Whit Weeks here, when you got here, was that like a cheat code for you as far as kind of getting the lay of the land and understanding things? He seemed to be right there alongside you every way. How has he been beneficial to you?
Yeah, I think that was I think that was critical from the standpoint the way that I looked at it. Not just a resource that's been here, because there's plenty of that. We got coaches and other people in the building, but that the current players, or potential portal players knew, that a messaging right off the bat was, okay, here's a player that could go to the NFL, and decided to stay because of what he thinks of LSU, but also what he thinks of the new staff and the direction that it's going. And I thought that was really important to get done, because then that would trickle into other players. And I think that did have an effect, that these other guys like Ty came and stuff, when they know, okay, here's the guy that was leader of the defense could go, and so many now go, and he decided to stay.
Just your familiarity with Corey Raymond. Saw him working with the DBs today. I'm sure you knew him from afar. What's it like working with him now? What do you see in his coaching style?
Yeah, I knew about Corey, over the years because of the success that he had, and how well he recruited too. Very rarely do you find both. And sometimes you got to make decisions, and you hire guys that are really good recruiters or really good coaches, and you put together your staff that way, your pieces, so they gel together. And then sometimes you find guys that are elite at both. And so it's great he's on our team. And also, if you can find them and at a place that they're passionate about too, I mean, that's kind of the rare trifecta.
Coach over here. I know you talked about a lot of new pieces, a lot of new coaches, players. What have you seen from a chemistry standpoint, just a week or two into spring, and where you want to see that towards the end of spring, by the time we're done?
Yeah, I think we constantly work on that. I'm not as concerned chemistry yet because we got to get fundamentals, and from like we just talked about, don't fight in practice. Like we're starting from the beginning, footwork, how to tackle without tackling, all these things, and then I think chemistry is more down the road and more of a training camp type of thing, in my opinion.
Coach, mine said a no spring game, and how many scrimmages you'll have during the spring?
Yeah, I kind of, look at that as it goes. And instead of being completely set, like how many plays, how many scrimmages, how much tackling, just kind of continue to get a feel for the team and how they're developing. And I just stopped the spring game a few years ago. One, because at one point it was on TV and giving that. But then it was on TV, and then you're giving the opponent, because there was another portal coming up too. So you're basically giving people evaluation of your players, especially your newer ones, and how they're doing. And then it became that on top of the financial piece of, okay, how much you're investing in them now and how significant injuries are, and looking at the big picture of that, and just feel like it's not worth it. No different than they don't in the NFL in the middle of spring. They don't go and have some tackling scrimmage.
Yeah, Lane, LSU made another really big hire with one of their programs this last week with Will Wade coming on with men's basketball coach. Just wonder if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I talked to him the other day. Obviously, he's extremely excited about it. I did not know him personally. I think from what I know, which I don't know a lot about basketball, he's been very successful wherever he's been. And I think, too, again, like we just said with Corey, if you're passionate about a place and you're a really good coach, that's a really good combination. And, I know there's a lot of judgment about whether you should go, and he just got there and all those things. Probably have a unique view of that. But I just think everything is everybody's story. They got one life to live. And what they want to choose to do and what they believe their story is after they get the best information they can from the people that are closest to them, and they make their decisions. And then in my opinion, it's that person's job to go prove that decision right. And so I know people are really excited about it. I'm sure it does speak volumes of LSU, because to me, there's somebody that understands everything about LSU, understands the power of LSU, went through a very unique situation, kind of a breakup, and then makes the decision to come back. To me, says a lot about LSU.
Can you confirm Gabriel Reliford's injury and how his absence maybe affects that room?
Yeah, that's a difficult injury. Really challenging for him after missing time last year. He was doing a great job. Again, kind of like the way I view that position, like receivers, if you're going to be really good, because play counts are up nowadays, and as you look at the conference, it used to be kind of fast and it slowed down a little bit offensively. If you look at like last year, there weren't really many up-tempo teams. And now you kind of have this swing back. So to me, even more than ever, to have multiple defensive ends that can rush and that can play snaps to play against that tempo, this was a significant loss for us. He has a really good future here, and we were really excited about how he was performing.
If you could give us an update on your quarterbacks, I was surprised to see Sam's mobility when we saw him out there. I wasn't expecting him to be that mobile, but how is it beneficial for Landon and Husan as well?
Well, for them, it's great because they get so many extra reps. Basically like everything in life, there's a cost and there's a benefit to everything that happens. And so, obviously we would love to have Sam and love to have him taking all the team reps fully healthy, but because he's not, it benefits them. And they've done a really good job with that. And it makes them show up because now they're up there with the ones. But it's been challenging for Sam. He's extremely competitive, so I know it bothers him that he can't do more, and that's a really good thing.
Lane, you mentioned passion on the coaching staff. With so many new players on the roster, how do you guys transfer that to all these guys who are in a new place in their first year?
Well, it's our job to set the tempo. You know, we get hired as coaches not just to draw plays. You know, we got to set the tempo by the way that we work, by the standards that we have, by the habits that we develop, but what we show them. And then I believe that trickles down. You know, I think coaches that stand up here and say, hey, we need this to happen and you need to be disciplined and you need to do these things off the field and all these, and then you're not doing them yourself, you know, it's mixed messaging. So I believe the staff does a really good job of showing extreme commitment and dedication to getting this thing turned around and performing at a really high level. And I think the players see that, and that becomes the norm of how the whole building works.
Lane, I know obviously you come from an offensive background. You played quarterback and everything, but you've spent your whole life around great defensive coaches like your dad, Nick Saban, Pete Carroll. How much of your offensive philosophy was influenced by them, the things that you learned from them that they didn't want to see, that gave them problems, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was very blessed on all those circumstances, you know, to be born with a defensive father that communicated stuff so well. And so I would sit there and he would talk about problem plays and make cut-ups, you know, when I was really young. And so to see that and then go to Pete Carroll and then to Nick Saban, like to have that, and not just you're around them, but then you're the offensive coordinator for both, win national championships with both. So you're able to learn all that, you know, somebody, like you mentioned earlier, like a cheat code of something that really was. And so I'm very fortunate that way, and that stuff still happens. You know, we still see defenses and things. Obviously, Pete Carroll and Nick Saban, but my dad, that, you know, systems that people are running or certain defenses, and then we drop back to things over the years that we remember gave them problems. I mean, it'll happen with Charlie and I. We'll be so have them and be like, remember that play that Auburn, you know, our first year at Alabama, you know, ran against Saban's defense when they were in this coverage. You know, so we're constantly using that. All right, guys, thank you.